Welcome to my review of The Loneliness of the Black Republican by Leah Wright Rigueur, or Rigueur. I don't know how to pronounce that last name. So, The Loneliness of the Black Republican is a history book that covers the span of time basically from 1936 to 1980 in American politics concerning African Americans in the Republican Party. It's about 300 pages, and it's like a compared to the other history books I've read on this channel, like the post office one, How the Post Office Created America. That's more for like a general audience type of thing. The Loneliness of the Black Republican by Leah Wright Rigueur is a scholarly history book. This is the kind of history book that you would be assigned in a political science or history course, probably in a college, most likely. It's not like a history book that anybody would just get and read casually, typically. I mean, so it's not like a book you can just sit and read. You know, there's a lot of text on the pages. There's a lot of notes in the back of the book. Like the note section is several dozens of pages, you know, because this is where the actual book ends, right here. That's the actual book, and then all this is the notes in the index. So there's quite a bit of research that went into this book. But nonetheless, even though it's more of a difficult read due to the way it's written in a scholarly manner, I would say that it's still worth reading if the subject interests you. If American politics or African American issues interest you, I would suggest reading it. I found it interesting. Well, there's a lot of information in The Loneliness of the Black Republican that I didn't know before reading it. So I found it a worthwhile, interesting read. I read it over several months. I didn't read it real quick like some of the books that I review on this channel. But it was good. I mean, you just break it up in 10 to 15 pages and you can read it, you know, and get it done slowly but surely. It might be a little challenging, it might be a little bland in some areas because of the way it's written, but there's a lot of worthwhile information in it. One of the things I noticed that I thought was interesting was that how much Leah Wright Rigueur would mention Jet magazine, which is no longer published, I don't think, or at least physically published, because I never thought of Jet magazine as like, you know, something you cite in a history book. I always just, you know, looked at it for the beauty of the week, if you know what I mean. But another thing I thought was interesting was how much Jackie Robinson was in the first part of this book, probably maybe the first third of it. Evidently, Jackie Robinson was a very active Republican back in the day, but then eventually he left the Republican Party, I think around when Barry Goldwater was nominated, or maybe a little afterwards. And these are some excerpts from the book. And basically, it covers from 1936, the election of 1936, the presidential election, and it goes all the way to 1980. That's the time period that The Loneliness of the Black Republican covers in American politics. And so this is from chapter 1, like one of the first pages after the introduction. Chapter 1 is entitled Running with Hares and Hunting with Hounds. And this is basically explaining how African American voters from 1930 to 1936, there was basically a transition from more African Americans voting for the Democratic Party opposed to the Republican Party, which had been the party that most African Americans had supported up to that point. On November 3rd, 1936, 71% of black voters cast their ballots for the Democratic incumbent Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That choice would mark the beginning of a radical realignment in American politics, a change so deep and lasting that in the present era, most find it hard to believe that a majority of the black electorate ever voted for Republican presidents. Further on down the page, thus while the realignment of the black electorate between 1932 and 1936 was remarkable, it was not a surprise. Many African Americans were ripe for courting from a shrewd Democratic presidential incumbent. They also had nothing to lose by leaving the Republican Party, whereas political coalitions with Northern Democrats hinted at the possibility of racial and economic progress. Moreover, the Roosevelt administration was the first administration since Lincoln's to actively minister to the needs of blacks, though many of the programs were not deliberately targeted at African Americans. And so, from that point, more African Americans begun to vote for the Democratic Party. And then this next part I'm going to read is from Chapter 3, the beginning of it, from Chapter 3, called The Challenge of Change. And it concerns Edward W. Brooke, who was a figure that was mentioned in this book quite often. He was a black Republican, of course, and he was a very interesting person, and I had never heard of him until I read this book, The Loneliness of the Black Republican. So I thought he's an important figure, so I'll highlight him in this review. In November 1966, in one of the country's most intense senatorial races, Massachusetts Attorney General Edward W. Brooke stunned the nation when he soundly defeated his Democratic challenger, Endicott Peabody, earning their support of more than 60% of the Massachusetts electorate. Brooke skirted the political bureaucracy of a volatile Republican Party to become the first black senator since Reconstruction. Further down the page, Brooke's rapid rise, another political observer concluded, would soon shatter the myth that the country wasn't ready for a black president. All the way back in 1966, people are saying that. And then further into that chapter, they were talking about Richard Nixon running for president, and it says, the Pittsburgh Courier speculated that such approval indicated that GOP leaders were grooming Brooke to be the vice presidential nominee in 1968, which of course wasn't the truth. But I just thought, and then eventually Edward Brooke had 2 terms as a U.S. Senator in the Senate, and he lost his re-election in 1978 after kind of being accused of scandals. I highlighted this, I don't know exactly why, but I thought it was interesting at the time I read it, I guess. That ideological chasm is thrown into even harsher focus when we consider that African Americans have become more conservative over the decades, now composing almost a third of black communities. Their ideological orientation, however, has not translated into Republican affiliation. Between 1984 and 2012, black identification with the GOP reached no higher than 15%. Similarly, black support for Republican presidential candidates peaked at 12% during that period. In short, although their moral, religious, and economic conservatism may align with the GOP, African Americans still experience a political dissonance when it comes to the Republican Party. And then I will read out loud the very final paragraph of the book in the conclusion to give you basically, what Leah Wright Rigueur came to her conclusion and basically the end of the book, what she thinks. It has taken more than half a century to get where we are today. Accordingly, any solution for winning the black vote will involve yeoman work and hard, grueling outreach efforts at the local, state, and national level. It must prepare the party's image through genuine displays of empathy. Equally important, the party has to propose and create viable solutions that meet the needs of the black electorate, moving beyond a singular focus on the black middle class. This is not to suggest that the GOP become the Democratic Party. Instead, it means that the party has to be willing to commit to forging a broad-based message that takes into account conservatism and the perspectives of racial minorities and does not pit them against one another. Such suggestions may feel cliched. After all, Ralph Bunche gave the Republican Party the playbook to win back black votes in 1939. Since then, the GOP has occasionally acted on those recommendations, but not in any transformative way. Perhaps one of the final lessons in this history is that the GOP needs to demonstrate an unwavering and sweeping commitment to an evolving American public. What remains to be seen is whether the party has the wherewithal to change. So, and basically in The Loneliness of the Black Republican, you can see history repeat itself with each election, basically. and it's basically like the reason why most black Republicans said they were black Republicans back then was to say like, oh well, it's two-party competition, because if all the African Americans were in the Democratic Party, then the Republicans would feel like they wouldn't have to appeal to black voters. And so I think a lot of the people's justification to be a black Republican in this book, a lot of them say that it's to, have representation in both parties. But it seemed like from the book, basically, the Republican Party would just put black people in symbolic positions, and then when black Republicans would propose new ideas for policy, the Republicans, the white Republicans, the white Republican leadership would basically be like, yeah, we're not going to do that, So the black Republicans were constantly frustrated that they seemingly had a little bit of power, but they could never get any of their ideas through. Sometimes they put their ideas on the party platform, but it would lead to little actual action. Like Richard Nixon, they said he had like a black cabinet of black advisors, and it seemed like at the beginning he was willing to listen to them a little bit, but then eventually, as his term went on and he was running for re-election, they were just a symbolic type of advisor, I guess, and he really didn't pay attention to them. And then when Gerald Ford took over, black Republicans thought he would be more willing to work with black Republicans to get their policy ideas passed, but then that turned out to not be true as well. So basically, it seems like there was a cyclical nature of the GOP leading on black Republicans until after the election, and then them not wanting to do any of the stuff that they proposed. And also, the GOP, they were trying to do their Southern strategy to get the South to vote for them, so they didn't want to seem like they were giving too much to the African Americans, so it wouldn't offend the white Southern voters, basically. So that was basically the book, The Loneliness of the Black Republican. I would say, you could rent it at the library, but I don't know if you could read it in like 3 weeks or 2 weeks or however long your library lets you rent out the book, so you probably have to recheck it out again if you wanted to read this. But I think it's worth a read. I mean, if you're assigned The Loneliness of the Black Republican in like a class, I would say definitely read it. There's good information there that you should learn. But if you're just reading it, just casually, I would say it's probably going to take some time, unless you have a lot of time on your hands. But overall, I found there to be information I did not know. There was quite a bit of information I didn't know in The Loneliness of the Black Republican, so I would say it was worth my time reading the book. And I would recommend it if the subject of black Republicans interests you, or politics in general in America. So The Loneliness of the Black Republican by Leah Wright Rigueur. Check it out if it sounds interesting to you.